The hardest choices are the ones nobody applauds, yet they are often the ones that quietly change the most lives. Rain poured across the nearly empty streets of Cedar Grove just after 9:30 on a cold Friday night, turning traffic lights into shimmering ribbons of red and gold across the wet pavement. Most people hurried home without looking around, eager to escape the storm that rattled storefront windows and filled the sidewalks with rushing water. Daniel Carter tightened his jacket as he walked beside his 9-year-old daughter, Emma, after finishing an emergency electrical repair for an elderly customer who had lost power before the weekend. Their old pickup truck was parked only a block away, but Emma suddenly slowed her steps and gently tugged on her father's sleeve. "Dad," she whispered, pointing toward a lonely bus stop across the street. "Someone is sitting there." Daniel looked through the curtain of rain. Beneath the flickering shelter light sat a young woman wearing an elegant cream-colored coat, now soaked by the storm. Her head rested against the glass panel behind her, and she barely moved except for the occasional shiver. Several passing cars slowed for a moment before continuing on. A couple carrying umbrellas glanced toward the shelter, quietly exchanged uncertain looks, and kept walking. Daniel remained still for several seconds. Emma looked up at him with a familiar expression that always appeared whenever someone needed help. "Do you think she's all right?" she asked softly. Daniel crossed the street without answering. As they approached, he noticed no visible injuries, only exhaustion and the unmistakable scent of alcohol mixed with rain. The young woman opened her eyes briefly before closing them again, clearly disoriented and unable to focus. A designer handbag rested beside her on the bench, untouched despite the empty street. Daniel knelt a respectful distance away so he would not frighten her. "Miss," he said gently, "can you hear me?" She opened her eyes again and managed only a faint nod before whispering, "I am sorry. I just wanted everything to stop for a little while." Her voice carried sadness far heavier than the storm surrounding them. Daniel noticed she was trembling from a cold. Emma quietly removed her own dry blanket from the back seat of the truck and wrapped it carefully around the young woman's shoulders. The stranger looked at the little girl with confused gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Emma smiled kindly. "My dad says people get warmer faster when they know someone cares." Daniel checked the nearly deserted street before taking out his phone. "Would you like me to call someone from your family?" The young woman searched her handbag, but frowned as though trying to remember something important. "My phone. I do not know where it is." She lowered her head again, exhausted. Daniel hesitated. He knew how easily kindness could be misunderstood. He also knew he could not leave someone vulnerable alone in the middle of a storm. After a long, thoughtful breath, he quietly made his decision. "Emma," he said calmly, "let us take our guest somewhere warm until she feels better. Tomorrow we can help her contact whoever is worried about her." Emma nodded immediately as though the answer had always been obvious. Together, they slowly helped the young woman into the pickup truck, making sure she remained comfortable in the back seat beneath the blanket. As Daniel drove carefully through the rain toward his modest home, he never imagined that dozens of black sport utility vehicles were searching every major road across the city for the same mysterious stranger. Inside one of them, a distinguished woman with silver-streaked hair stared anxiously at a digital map, while security officers reported another unsuccessful search. She was not simply looking for her missing daughter. She was watching the longest night of her life quietly unfold, completely unaware that the person she feared had vanished forever was already being carried towards safety by a humble single father who believed kindness should never depend on knowing someone's name. Morning sunlight filtered gently through the kitchen curtains as the smell of fresh pancakes drifted through Daniel Carter's small home. The storm had disappeared during the night, leaving the quiet neighborhood washed clean beneath a clear blue sky. Daniel stood at the stove, turning another pancake, while Emma carefully arranged sliced strawberries on 3 plates instead of 2. She looked toward the hallway before lowering her voice. "Do you think she's awake yet?" Daniel smiled softly. "She has had a long night. Let her wake up when she is ready." Neither of them had asked the young woman a single question after helping her into the house. Daniel had simply offered the guest bedroom, left a folded set of clean clothes outside the door, and quietly wished her a peaceful night before returning to Emma's room to make sure his daughter felt safe. Trust, he often believed, was built through respect rather than explanations. A few minutes later, the bedroom door opened slowly. The young woman stepped into the hallway, wearing the simple sweatshirt and sweatpants Daniel had left for her. Her damp hair had been brushed back, but embarrassment still lingered across her face. She paused when she saw the breakfast table already prepared for 3 people. "Good morning," Daniel said warmly without the slightest hint of judgment. "I hope you were able to get some rest." She looked around the modest kitchen, almost surprised by its peaceful atmosphere. I do not know how to thank you." Emma slid the 3rd plate toward the empty chair with an encouraging smile. "You can start by eating breakfast. Dad says pancakes solve more problems than people realize." The young woman laughed quietly for what felt like the first time in days. "I'm not sure that is scientifically true." Emma grinned. "Maybe not, but they still help." Daniel poured a cup of coffee before placing it gently beside her plate. "There is no hurry. Whenever you feel ready, we can help you contact your family or anyone you trust." She lowered her eyes for a moment. "I wish I remembered where my phone is." Daniel nodded with complete understanding. "Then we will figure out together." No one asked why she had been alone. No one questioned how much she had been drinking. No one demanded an explanation she was not yet ready to give. Instead, they shared breakfast while talking about simple things. Emma described her favorite library books. Daniel mentioned a difficult electrical repair from the previous afternoon, and the young woman gradually relaxed enough to smile naturally. She noticed family photographs covering one kitchen wall, each one capturing ordinary moments filled with genuine happiness rather than expensive vacations or grand celebrations. "You have a beautiful home," she said quietly. Daniel glanced around the little house before smiling. "It is small, but it has been kind to us." Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Dad says homes are measured by how people feel inside them." The young woman looked down at her plate, visibly touched by words she had not expected to hear. For reasons she could not fully explain, the warmth surrounding that breakfast table felt unfamiliar despite being something she had secretly missed for years. Meanwhile, across the city, inside the top floor of Bennett Global Headquarters, Eleanor Bennett stood before a wall of security monitors while anxious executives waited nearby. Mason Grant entered carrying the latest search report. His expression revealed the answer before he spoke. "We still have not located Miss Bennett." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly before looking back toward the city skyline. "Keep searching," she said quietly. "Somewhere, someone has seen my daughter." At that exact moment, inside a small kitchen across town, Olivia Bennett smiled as Emma proudly placed another warm pancake on her plate, completely unaware that the worried mother searching every corner of the city would never imagine her missing daughter had spent the night surrounded not by luxury or security, but by the quiet kindness of 2 strangers who never once asked her family name. After breakfast, Daniel Carter gathered his toolbox and prepared for another full day of electrical repair appointments. Life had taught him that responsibilities did not pause simply because unexpected moments appeared. He placed a handwritten list of emergency phone numbers on the kitchen counter before turning toward the young woman with a reassuring smile. "Please make yourself comfortable. There is fresh coffee in the pot. And if you remember anyone you would like to call, you may use the house phone whenever you are ready." She looked at him with quiet disbelief. "You trust me enough to stay here alone?" Daniel shrugged gently while slipping on his work jacket. "Trust has to begin somewhere." Emma picked up her backpack and hurried toward the front door before stopping beside their guest. "We will not be gone forever," she said cheerfully. "I have school, and Dad has work, but we always come home." The little girl waved enthusiastically before leaving with her father. A few moments later, the old pickup truck disappeared down the quiet neighborhood street, leaving the house wrapped in peaceful silence. The young woman wandered slowly through the modest home, noticing shelves filled with library books, framed photographs of Daniel and Emma through different stages of life, handmade drawings attached to the refrigerator with colorful magnets, and a worn wooden dining table marked by years of shared meals. Everything felt simple. Everything felt genuine. She paused beside a photograph showing Daniel teaching Emma how to ride a bicycle. Their laughter seemed almost visible inside the faded picture. She quietly realized she could not remember the last time she had seen happiness that required so little. Across the city, Daniel climbed a ladder outside a small family-owned bakery, replacing damaged electrical wiring above the entrance sign, while greeting customers with the same warm smile he offered everyone. He accepted no special attention, worked carefully, and thanked the elderly owner for trusting him with the repair. Later that morning, he stopped to help a stranded driver restart a vehicle whose battery had failed in a grocery store parking lot. He refused the offered payment with a friendly shake of his head. "Just help someone else when you have the chance," he said before returning to work. Meanwhile, back inside the little house, the young woman finally gathered enough courage to search her handbag more carefully. Hidden inside a small inner pocket, she discovered a business card with a handwritten emergency number. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed it using Daniel's landline. The call connected almost immediately. "Miss Bennett, eh?" Man's relieved voice answered before she could speak. "This is Mason Grant. Are you safe?" She closed her eyes. "Yes, I am safe." On the top floor of Bennett Global Headquarters, Mason stood so suddenly that his chair rolled backward across the floor. Eleanor Bennett looked up immediately. "You found her?" Mason nodded with visible relief before placing the call on speaker. Eleanor stepped closer, her voice filled with both strength and unmistakable emotion. "Olivia." Tears quietly formed in the young woman's eyes. "I'm all right, Mom." Eleanor exhaled slowly, the weight of the longest night of her life finally beginning to lift. "Where are you?" Olivia looked around the peaceful kitchen before answering softly. "I am in the home of a man who helped me without asking who I was." Eleanor's expression changed from relief to thoughtful curiosity. "Give me the address." Olivia hesitated for only a second. "Please promise me something first." Eleanor listened carefully. "Do not arrive with anger. Do not frighten them. They treated me with more kindness than I deserved." The room fell silent on both ends of the call. Eleanor slowly nodded, even though her daughter could not see her. "I promise." Neither woman realized that before the day ended, two completely different worlds would meet beneath the roof of one modest house, and the greatest surprise waiting there would not be wealth, power, or influence, but the quiet dignity of a father who never believed kindness should depend upon knowing the value of the person standing in front of him. Late that afternoon, Daniel Carter parked his aging pickup truck in the driveway, just as Emma jumped out of the passenger seat, carrying a library book almost as large as her backpack. She hurried toward the front porch before stopping suddenly. 3 black sport utility vehicles stood quietly along the curb, their polished surfaces reflecting the warm afternoon sunlight. Several professionally dressed security personnel waited respectfully near the sidewalk, careful not to crowd the small property. Daniel immediately noticed the scene, but remained calm. He gently rested one hand on Emma's shoulder. "Stay beside me," he said, softly. Emma nodded without fear. "Okay, Dad." Before either of them reached the front steps, the front door opened. Olivia Bennett stepped outside wearing the same simple clothes Daniel had lent her that morning, though her expression now carried both relief and nervous anticipation. Behind her stood an elegant woman with silver streak hair, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit. Despite the unmistakable confidence she carried, exhaustion lingered in her eyes after a night without sleep. Daniel immediately understood that this could only be Olivia's mother. Eleanor Bennett slowly walked forward until only a few feet separated them. For a long moment, she simply looked at the modest home, the weathered pickup truck, the little girl standing beside her father, and the quiet dignity surrounding all three. Finally, she spoke. "Mr. Carter, my name is Eleanor Bennett." Daniel offered a polite handshake. "It is nice to meet you, ma'am." Eleanor accepted his hand with genuine gratitude rather than formality. "There are not enough words to thank you for protecting my daughter." Daniel glanced toward Olivia before smiling gently. She did not need protection as much as she needed somewhere warm to rest. Olivia lowered her eyes, visibly moved by the simplicity of his answer. Emma stepped closer to Olivia with a bright smile. I packed you a cookie for the ride home. She reached into her backpack and carefully handed over a small paper napkin wrapped around a homemade chocolate chip cookie. Olivia accepted it with both hands as though it were something priceless. Thank you, she whispered. I do not think anyone has ever packed me a goodbye cookie before. Emma smiled proudly. Dad says people should never leave hungry. Eleanor watched the exchange in complete silence. She had spent decades building one of the country's most successful companies, yet nothing she had achieved felt as extraordinary as the effortless kindness unfolding before her. Mason Grant quietly approached from one of the vehicles carrying Olivia's recovered handbag and phone. He handed them to her before stepping back without interrupting the moment. Olivia turned toward Daniel. I owe you one explanation. Daniel gently shook his head. You do not owe me anything. She looked at him with sincere gratitude. I would still like you to know who I am. Daniel nodded politely. Olivia took a slow breath. My mother is the founder and chief executive officer of Bennett Global. Daniel blinked once in mild surprise before looking toward Eleanor again. Then you must have had a very difficult night. Eleanor smiled softly, almost amused that his first concern remained focused on someone else. Yes, she admitted quietly. The longest of my life. She looked around the little front yard once more before speaking with heartfelt sincerity. When Olivia called me this morning, she asked me not to arrive with anger because she said she had been treated with more kindness here than she had experienced in a very long time. Now I understand exactly what she meant. Daniel smiled modestly. Sometimes people simply need someone willing to listen before they are ready to stand again. The afternoon breeze moved gently through the trees as complete silence settled over everyone present. No one seemed eager to leave. In that quiet moment, the distance between extraordinary wealth and ordinary life quietly disappeared, replaced by something far more meaningful. Eleanor realized she had come expecting to reclaim her daughter, yet she was leaving with something entirely unexpected. Profound respect for a humble father whose greatest success could never be measured by money because it had always been measured by the lives he quietly lifted along the way. After the black sport utility vehicles quietly disappeared beyond the neighborhood corner, the little street returned to its familiar peaceful rhythm. Yet something inside Eleanor Bennett refused to return to business as usual. During the drive back to the city, she remained unusually silent while Olivia rested comfortably beside her, holding the homemade chocolate chip cookie Emma had carefully wrapped in a paper napkin. She had not eaten it. Instead, she held it gently in both hands as though it represented something far more valuable than a simple dessert. Eleanor finally glanced toward her daughter. You have not stopped smiling since we left. Olivia looked down at the cookie before answering softly. I do not remember the last time someone cared for me without expecting anything in return. Those words lingered in the quiet interior of the vehicle long after they were spoken. The following Monday morning, while Bennett Global resumed its usual pace of executive meetings and international conference calls, Eleanor requested something unusual from Mason Grant. I want you to learn about Daniel Carter, she said calmly. Mason looked surprised. A background investigation? Eleanor gently shook her head. Not an investigation. I am not searching for mistakes. I want to understand the life he has already built. Mason nodded respectfully before leaving her office. Over the next several days, he quietly visited neighborhoods where Daniel completed electrical repairs, spoke with local business owners, elderly customers, school administrators, and community volunteers. Everywhere he went, the answers sounded remarkably similar. An elderly widow described how Daniel had repaired her electrical panel during a harsh winter storm and quietly refused payment after discovering she lived alone on a fixed income. The owner of the neighborhood bakery smiled while explaining that Daniel often fixed small electrical problems after closing hours so the morning staff would never lose business. Emma's elementary school principal recalled how Daniel volunteered every semester to repair stage lighting for school performances without accepting recognition. He always says children deserve happy memories, she explained warmly. Mason continued gathering stories, and not one person mentioned wealth, ambition, or personal gain. They spoke instead about patience, honesty, humility, and reliability. By Friday afternoon, he returned to Bennett Global, carrying only a slim folder. Eleanor looked at it with quiet curiosity. That cannot possibly contain everything. Mason smiled faintly. There was not much paperwork to collect because most of what defines Mr. Carter cannot be filed inside documents. Eleanor slowly opened the folder. Inside were handwritten notes summarizing dozens of conversations, rather than financial records or legal reports. Every page described another quiet act of kindness performed without publicity. She finished reading the final page before closing the folder with thoughtful care. Olivia, who had quietly entered the office moments earlier, watched her mother's expression change from curiosity to admiration. "Now you understand," she said softly. Eleanor nodded. "I believed your safety was the miracle of that night." She paused before looking toward the city skyline beyond her office windows. "Now I realize the greater miracle is that a man like Daniel Carter still chooses to live exactly the same way every single day." Olivia smiled gently. "He never asked who I was." Eleanor answered with quiet conviction. "And that is exactly why I believe he deserves to know who he truly is." She reached for the telephone on her desk and asked her assistant to arrange a private invitation for Daniel to visit Bennett Global the following week. Not for ceremony, not for publicity, not to repay a favor with money. She wanted to offer something far more meaningful than gratitude alone. She wanted to place an unexpected opportunity into the hands of a man whose character had already proven that genuine greatness is built long before the world ever notices it. 1 week later, Daniel Carter drove his aging pickup truck into the visitor parking lot of Bennett Global with the same quiet composure he carried into every unfamiliar place. The towering glass headquarters reflected the bright morning sky, and employees in tailored business attire crossed the spacious plaza carrying briefcases and coffee cups as another busy day began. Daniel looked down at the invitation letter one final time before placing it back inside his jacket pocket. He had almost declined the invitation, convinced that someone else deserved whatever Eleanor Bennett wished to discuss. Yet Emma had smiled over breakfast and said something he could not forget. "Dad, sometimes saying yes to kindness is another way of being kind." Those simple words accompanied him as he entered the building. A receptionist welcomed him warmly before escorting him to a private executive lounge. Overlooking the city, Daniel admired the view for only a moment before noticing photographs displayed along one wall celebrating community scholarships, neighborhood rebuilding projects, children's hospitals, and volunteer initiatives. He smiled quietly. The room reflected the same values he had witnessed in Eleanor and Olivia rather than the cold formality he had expected from a global corporation. A few minutes later, the doors opened, and Eleanor Bennett entered with Olivia beside her. Olivia looked healthier than she had on the rainy night they first met, her smile now relaxed and genuine. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor said warmly as they exchanged handshakes. Daniel answered with characteristic humility. "Thank you for inviting me." They settled around a small round table instead of the large executive conference room nearby. Eleanor had intentionally chosen a quieter setting because she wanted a conversation rather than a presentation. She looked directly at Daniel before speaking. "I have spent the past week learning about the life you have built." Daniel smiled politely. "I hope nobody had to spend too much time doing that. It is a fairly ordinary life." Olivia shook her head with gentle admiration. "That is exactly what makes it extraordinary." Eleanor placed a slim folder on the table, but did not open it. "Every person I spoke with described the same man. Honest, dependable, compassionate. Someone who quietly improves every place he enters." Daniel lowered his eyes modestly. "People have been very generous." Eleanor continued softly. "No, Daniel. They were simply truthful." For several moments the room became peacefully silent. Then Eleanor slid the folder toward him. "I would like to offer you something, but not because you helped my daughter." Daniel looked up with quiet curiosity. Eleanor smiled. "You have already earned this opportunity long before you met Olivia." Inside the folder rested an offer to become Community Facilities Coordinator for Bennett Global, overseeing maintenance partnerships, neighborhood volunteer projects, and apprenticeship programs for young tradespeople entering the workforce. It was a position built around practical experience, integrity, and mentoring others rather than corporate politics. Daniel carefully read every page before looking back at Eleanor. This is far more responsibility than repairing electrical systems. Eleanor nodded. Yes, because I believe you have spent years repairing something much more important. People's confidence in one another. Daniel remained silent, visibly moved by the unexpected trust placed before him. Olivia smiled warmly. You once helped someone believe tomorrow could still be better than yesterday. Imagine how many more lives you could encourage if that became part of your work every day. Daniel closed the folder slowly and looked through the window toward the city below. He thought about Emma, about every customer who had become a friend, about every quiet opportunity life had placed in front of him without warning. Finally, he turned back with the same peaceful smile that had first convinced Olivia she was safe. If accepting this means I can continue serving people with honesty and still be home every evening for my daughter, then I would be honored. Eleanor extended her hand once more, not as a billionaire executive welcoming a new employee, but as one grateful human being recognizing another. In that quiet handshake, no one measured success by wealth, influence, or titles. They measured it by trust, and everyone in the room understood that trust is the one gift that can only be earned through a lifetime of quiet kindness. Several weeks passed, and Daniel Carter settled naturally into his new role without allowing the title to change the man he had always been. Every morning, he still arrived early, carrying the same weather toolbox inside his truck, even though much of his work now involved guiding community projects, mentoring young apprentices, and visiting neighborhood organizations supported by Bennett Global. He insisted on learning the names of every maintenance worker, receptionist, volunteer, and delivery driver before attending executive meetings, because he believed respect always belonged at the beginning of every relationship rather than the end. Employees quickly noticed something unusual. Daniel greeted the newest. In turn, with exactly the same warmth he offered senior executives. When equipment needed moving before a charity event, he rolled up his sleeves instead of giving instructions from a distance. When a nervous apprentice made a small mistake during an installation, Daniel quietly stood beside him and said, "Learning lasts much longer than embarrassment ever should." Word of his quiet leadership spread throughout the company without anyone planning it. Meanwhile, Emma became a familiar face around the community center after school. She loved helping volunteers organize books, assemble care packages, and decorate encouragement cards for children staying in local hospitals. Olivia often joined her after finishing work, leaving expensive business clothes behind in exchange for simple jeans and comfortable sweaters. Watching the two laugh together while sorting donated school supplies became one of Eleanor Bennett's favorite moments of every week. One afternoon, Eleanor arrived unexpectedly at the community center and found Daniel repairing a loose bookshelf while several executives in business attire worked beside neighborhood volunteers preparing backpacks for families beginning a new school year. No photographers had been invited. No reporters knew the event existed. Everyone was simply working together because the community needed them. Eleanor stood quietly near the entrance for several minutes before Daniel noticed her. "Good afternoon," he said with an easy smile. "Would you like a pair of work gloves?" Eleanor laughed softly. "Most people offer me a conference chair." Daniel handed her the gloves anyway. "Today we are a little short on volunteers." Without another word, Eleanor slipped on the gloves and joined everyone else, helping pack notebooks, pencils, and handwritten notes into dozens of backpacks. Emma watched with bright eyes before whispering to Olivia, "Your mom smiles more now." Olivia looked toward Eleanor, whose laughter blended naturally with the volunteers filling the room. "She does," she answered quietly. "I think she finally remembers what success is supposed to feel like." Later that evening, after the final backpack had been packed, everyone gathered around folding tables for a simple homemade dinner prepared by neighborhood families. Daniel thanked every volunteer individually before sitting beside Emma. Eleanor looked around the room, filled with teachers, electricians, office assistants, students, retirees, executives, and children sharing one meal without anyone paying attention to titles or wealth. She leaned toward Daniel and spoke almost in a whisper. I spent years believing leadership was measured by how many people followed me. Daniel looked around the room before answering gently. Maybe leadership is measured by how many people feel seen when they're standing beside us. Eleanor remained silent for several thoughtful moments before smiling with quiet gratitude. She realized that the greatest lesson she had received did not come from a boardroom, a business school, or a financial achievement. It came from an ordinary father who had never tried to impress anyone, yet quietly inspired every person fortunate enough to walk beside him. As warm evening light filled the community center and laughter echoed gently through the room, no one spoke about the rainy night that had first brought these lives together. They no longer needed to. That single act of kindness had already become something much greater, growing quietly through every life it continued to touch. Autumn gradually settled over Cedar Grove, painting neighborhood streets with shades of amber and gold, while life continued moving at its gentle, dependable pace. Daniel Carter still drove the same aging pickup truck each morning, still carried his weather toolbox, even when he no longer needed it every day, and still believed that every conversation deserved the same patience regardless of who stood on the other side. The only noticeable difference was that more people now sought his advice than his electrical skills alone. Young apprentices often stopped by his office before beginning community projects, asking how to earn respect instead of simply completing assignments. Daniel always answered with quiet simplicity. Listen before speaking. Help before being asked. Leave every place better than you found it. Those words slowly became an unofficial motto throughout the community facilities program. One Saturday afternoon, Bennett Global sponsored a neighborhood family festival in the town square. Children painted wooden birdhouses, local musicians performed on a small outdoor stage. Food trucks lined the streets, and volunteers collected winter coats for families preparing for colder weather. There are no exclusive guest lists, reserved seating areas, or executive entrances. Everyone arrived through the same gate and stood in the same lines. Emma eagerly guided younger children toward a craft table where they decorated greeting cards for residents at a nearby retirement community. Olivia joined her wearing comfortable jeans, a light blue sweater, and simple sneakers instead of business attire. Watching them laugh together while comparing colorful drawings brought a peaceful smile to nearly everyone who passed by. Daniel spent much of the afternoon helping volunteers assemble portable bookshelves that would later be donated to elementary schools with limited resources. Even after accepting a leadership position, he never hesitated to kneel on the pavement with a screwdriver in his hand whenever practical work needed to be done. Eleanor quietly observed him from across the square while speaking with community leaders. One of them smiled warmly and asked, "Has Mr. Carter always been this dependable?" Eleanor looked toward Daniel as he patiently showed a group of teenagers how to tighten loose bolts correctly without rushing anyone. "From everything I've learned," she answered softly, "he was already leading people long before anyone offered him a leadership title." As the afternoon drew to a close, Emma ran toward Daniel holding a small wooden birdhouse she had painted with bright white clouds and a simple blue roof. She smiled proudly before handing it to him. "This is for our backyard," she said, "so birds always know they are welcome." Daniel admired the little birdhouse before looking at his daughter with unmistakable pride. "That might be the nicest invitation anyone has ever built." Olivia stood nearby, quietly touched by the exchange. Eleanor walked over carrying 2 warm cups of apple cider and offered one to Daniel. "I've spent years building offices, partnerships, and companies," she said thoughtfully. "Today, I realize something different is being built here." Daniel accepted the cup with a grateful smile. "Communities grow the same way families do," he replied. "One kind decision at a time." Eleanor nodded slowly. The words settled gently in her heart because she knew they were true. Around them, volunteers loaded donated coats into waiting vans. Children chased one another beneath colorful autumn trees. Neighbors exchanged warm conversations, and music drifted softly across the town square. Nothing about the afternoon seemed extraordinary to those living it. Yet every quiet moment reflected the same lesson that had begun on one rainy night. Kindness offered without expectation never truly ends. It continues growing through every life it touches, often in ways no one can possibly measure, until ordinary people discover they have quietly become part of something far greater than themselves. 1 year later, the first warm days of spring returned to Cedar Grove, and the little maple trees, planted by neighborhood volunteers, had already begun stretching fresh green leaves toward the morning sun. Daniel Carter parked the same aging pickup truck outside the community center, smiling as Emma hurried ahead, carrying a small box of flower seedlings she had carefully grown on the kitchen windowsill. Some things had changed during the past year. Many things had not. Daniel still preferred work boots over polished shoes, still greeted every stranger with the same quiet respect, and still believed the greatest measure of success was returning home each evening knowing he had made someone else's day a little easier. Inside the community center, volunteers gathered for the annual Day of Kindness celebration that Bennett Global had quietly transformed into a tradition for the entire town. Families, teachers, business owners, retirees, students, electricians, nurses, and company employees worked side by side, decorating classrooms, preparing meals, planting gardens, and assembling care packages for neighbors facing difficult seasons. There were no reserved seats for executives and no special introductions for honored guests. Everyone wore simple volunteer shirts because everyone had come for the same reason. Eleanor Bennett looked across the busy room with peaceful satisfaction. The company she had spent decades building had become more successful than she had ever imagined. Yet the achievement that filled her heart most deeply could not be found inside a financial report. It lived inside ordinary moments like these, where strangers chose kindness without expecting applause. Olivia walked beside her, carrying several boxes of children's books, before stopping near Daniel and Emma. "I think we're going to need another bookshelf," she said with a smile. Daniel laughed softly. "That sounds like the best kind of problem." Emma proudly held up one of her flower seedlings. "This one is for the reading corner. Flowers make people want to stay longer." Olivia smiled warmly. "Then every child who visits will know someone cared enough to make the room beautiful." As the afternoon passed, laughter drifted through open windows while children painted colorful welcome signs, volunteers repaired playground benches, and neighbors shared homemade meals beneath bright blue skies. Richard Holloway arrived carrying supplies for the next community project and quietly joined a group of apprentices assembling picnic tables. He no longer introduced himself by his title. Instead, he simply asked where he was needed. Watching him work beside teenagers learning their first trade skills reminded Eleanor how much one humble example could influence countless lives. Later, as the sun slowly settled toward the horizon, everyone gathered beneath the young maple trees planted the previous year. Emma walked over to Daniel, holding a small framed photograph. It showed the rainy bus stop where everything had unknowingly begun, taken later by a local artist who remembered that unforgettable storm. She handed it to her father with a gentle smile. "I wanted us to remember that even rainy nights can become beautiful memories." Daniel looked at the picture before wrapping one arm around Emma's shoulders. Eleanor and Olivia stood quietly nearby, understanding the meaning without needing another explanation. Sometimes the greatest turning points in life arrived without celebration, without headlines, and without anyone recognizing their importance until much later. A father had chosen kindness because someone needed help. A frightened young woman had found safety instead of judgment. A mother had discovered that character was worth more than influence. A community had learned that compassion spreads farther than success ever can. As golden evening light bathed the park and families slowly walked home together, no one spoke about miracles. They simply smiled at one another, carrying the quiet certainty that every act of genuine kindness plants a seed whose harvest may not appear tomorrow, or even next year, but will one day grow into hope for someone who needs it most. And in that peaceful silence, Daniel understood he had never rescued a stranger on a rainy night. He had simply lived the values he wanted his daughter to remember forever. And those values had quietly changed every life they touched.